Picture yourself walking into a theater in 1928. Not a theater the way you know one now. A lobby with marble columns rising 3 stories, gold leaf on the ceiling, a chandelier the size of a small car hanging over your head. An usher in a uniform guides you to a velvet seat inside an auditorium built to look like a Moorish courtyard, or a French palace, or an Egyptian temple, complete with a painted sky on the ceiling that actually seemed to move. 5,000 people could sit inside, and you paid a quarter to be there. Now drive to your local movie theater today. A beige box next to a parking lot, attached to a mall, fluorescent lights, a kid at a counter selling you popcorn from a machine, 12 screens, all identical, all forgettable. Something enormous happened between those 2 buildings, and almost nobody talks about it. In the 1920s, movie palaces weren't just theaters. They were cathedrals built for the common man. Architects like John Eberson and Thomas Lamb designed auditoriums meant to transport a factory worker or a shop girl into total fantasy for 2 hours, somewhere they'd never otherwise set foot. The Roxy in New York sat 5,920 people and was nicknamed the Cathedral of the Motion Picture. The Fox in Detroit, the Chicago Theater, the Uptown in Chicago, each one built to outdo the last. Studios themselves financed and owned huge chains of these palaces, because in the 1920s and 30s, the theater wasn't separate from the movie business. It was the movie business. Paramount, Warner Brothers, MGM, Fox, they built the palaces, they owned the screens, and they controlled exactly what played on them. Then, in 1948, one Supreme Court case ended all of it. United States versus Paramount Pictures ruled that studios couldn't own the theaters that showed their films. It was an antitrust decision aimed at breaking up a monopoly, and on paper it sounds like a win for competition. But here's what almost nobody realizes. That single ruling knocked the financial foundation out from under every grand movie palace in America. Studios had built these buildings as marketing tools, loss leaders to sell their own films. Once they couldn't own the theaters anymore, there was no reason to maintain a 5,000-seat gold-leafed cathedral that cost a fortune to heat, staff, and repair. The economics that justified the palace disappeared overnight, and then television arrived and finished the job. By 1950, television sets were in over 9% of American homes. By 1955, more than half. Why get dressed, drive downtown, and pay for a ticket when the fantasy could come straight into your living room for free? Weekly movie attendance in America collapsed from around 90 million people in 1948 to under 50 million by the mid-1950s. Theaters that once sold out 5,000 seats a night were suddenly playing to a few hundred people scattered across a cavernous room built for a crowd that no longer existed. At the same time, something else was pulling people away from downtown altogether. The same suburban boom that gave America the ranch house and the strip mall gave it something else: the multiplex. Smaller, cheaper theaters built next to parking lots in the suburbs, close to where people actually lived now. No marble, no chandeliers, just a screen, a room, and a lower price to build it. A single downtown movie palace could cost what it took to build 10 suburban multiplex screens, and 10 screens meant 10 different movies playing at once, which meant more tickets sold to more people with less driving. The math was brutal, and the math won. Here's the detail that changes how you see every abandoned downtown theater you've ever passed. Most of these palaces didn't close because people stopped loving movies. They closed because a single building could no longer make financial sense once it wasn't backed by a studio, wasn't full every night, and was competing against 10 smaller, cheaper screens a few miles away in the suburbs. By the 1970s, hundreds of these buildings sat empty in the middle of American downtowns, buildings that had cost millions to build, using materials and craftsmanship nobody could afford to replicate anymore. Demolition was often cheaper than upkeep. Wrecking balls took down palaces that had taken master plasterers and muralists years to finish. The Roxy, the so-called Cathedral of the Motion Picture, was torn down in 1960 to make room for an apartment building. It stood for just 33 years. Some got lucky. The Fox in Detroit, the Chicago Theater, the Orpheum in Los Angeles were saved by preservationists, restored, and converted into concert halls and event venues, because a room built to sell a quarter-ticket fantasy in 1928 turned out to be exactly the kind of room people wanted to see a symphony or a touring Broadway show inside decades later. But for every palace that got saved, a dozen more didn't. Small-town movie palaces from Iowa to Georgia to Pennsylvania sat boarded up for decades, their marquees rusting, their ornate ceilings collapsing quietly with nobody watching. What replaced them tells you everything about what changed. The multiplex wasn't built to be beautiful. It was built to be efficient. Maximum screens, minimum square footage, minimum ornamentation, maximum turnover. A movie palace asked you to sit still and be amazed by the room itself before the film even started. A multiplex asks you to get in, watch, and get out, so the next showing can start on time. One was designed around wonder, the other was designed around throughput. And somewhere in that shift, the movie theater stopped being a destination and started being a delivery mechanism. There's something almost poetic about what killed the movie palace, because it wasn't one villain. It wasn't just the antitrust ruling, or just television, or just the suburbs. It was all three arriving within a single decade, each one cutting off a different leg the palace had been standing on, legally forbidden from being owned by the studios that built them, competing against a free screen in every living room, and economically outmatched by cheaper, smaller buildings closer to where the audience had already moved. Any one of those alone, the palace might have survived. All three together, nothing could. Walk through a surviving downtown in America today, Fresno, Youngstown, Elmira, and you can still sometimes find the marquee, empty, bolted shut. The name of the theater barely legible in cracked neon letters above a door. Nobody's opened in 50 years. Somewhere inside, a painted ceiling with stars that used to twinkle over a paying crowd is probably still there, flaking in the dark. We built those rooms because we believed going to the movies should feel like an event, like stepping into somewhere else entirely. And we let them die because it turned out that convenience and cheaper tickets and the suburbs mattered more to us than the room itself. Maybe that's the real question worth sitting with. It's not really why the movie palaces disappeared. It's what we decided we'd rather have instead. If you had the choice tonight, a folding chair in a beige box 12 minutes from your house, or a velvet seat under gold leaf and a painted sky downtown, which one would you actually choose? Drop your answer in the comments.